Hello and welcome to the second episode of Brofest Reviews. My name's Charlie, and today I want to talk about my favourite game of all time, known as Shenmue. Shenmue is a game that originally came out on the Sega Dreamcast in Japan in December of 1999 and was released a year later in the year 2000 over here, again in December. I first became aware of this game sometime after the Japan release from reading about it in the UK magazine Games Master, which, unlike games magazines these days, covered all of the consoles. So even though I didn't own a Dreamcast, I read about this game and became very intrigued by it several months before it was released in the United Kingdom. And what attracted me to this game, first of all, was the way the reviewer of the Japanese title talked about how immersive it was and how he'd never played anything like it before. He described it as somewhat like an RPG, but totally different to any RPGs that he'd played before. And it's perhaps unsurprising that this game was so unique when considering the amount of money that was spent on its development. It's estimated that the studio that produced this game, led by Yu Suzuki, who created such games as Space Harrier and Outrun for the arcade, spent between 50 and 70 million US dollars, equivalent in yen, in the production of this game, something that had never been heard of before, so it was a huge undertaking at the time. Upon its release in the United Kingdom, it was very positively reviewed by critics, and it soon developed a cult following, of which I was a part. But in terms of mainstream success, this game was really a flop. It did not return half as much as what it made in Western markets, and it was a miracle that Shenmue 2 was even produced at all. Shenmue 2, after that, the studio cancelled it, and the Sega Dreamcast, in fact, failed as a console not long after, partly attributed to how much money was spent by Sega and the studio AM2 on this game's development. So that's a little bit of the cultural background to this game. I just want to talk a little bit today about why it's so important to me, why I think it's so important to the video game history and landscape in general, but I also want to talk about the fact that it's not a perfect game, and there's plenty of things that annoyed me and frustrated me when playing it on the remastered version on PS4 some 19 years later. The opening cutscenes of this game are way too long on second playthrough, but I just wanted to show this very brief clip, which hopefully contextualizes the introduction of the game. So here we have Shady Landy. He's come to find out where Ryo's dad has hid the mysterious mirror. It's not made clear at the beginning of this game why this mirror is so important or why he wants it, and I won't spoil why that is, but it does have quite a lot of significance in the later story. As you can see, Landy is a force to be reckoned with, and poor Ryo gets to witness the death kick to the chops that finishes him off, while getting absolutely cream crackered himself. Landy's not one for the old back chat, as you can see. Lifts the wee lad up by the jugular. About to make sashimi out of him. And he's given up where the mirror is. You're fucked! So poor Ryo is left very grief-stricken at the beginning of the game, but also very determined to track down and find his father's killer and ultimately avenge his father's death. Both Ryo and his father are practitioners of a particular style of martial arts known as the Huzuki style, which is somewhere between Jiu-Jitsu and Kung Fu. So this is how the game opens. You've got this notebook, and one particularly troubling thing that I noticed the second time I played it last year is that he's written the number for the police as the first thing in his notebook, but when you phone the police to report your father's murder, Rio simply says, "That's a waste of time," and hangs up the phone.
I don't want the police involved.
So here we are in Rio's room. This is the remastered version of PS4, but really it stays very true to form. Some of the textures have been slightly updated, but really the only changes that they've made is upscaling it to HD resolution. Much of the character modelling has stayed the same, which is perhaps unsurprising given that this game was originally produced for the Dreamcast. This game obviously was originally written in Japanese, with all of the characters' mouth movements emulating the Japanese language, and some poor bastard in the AM2 team had to painstakingly redo all the facial animations for English-speaking language, which was then completely scuppered by the fact that the voice actors in this game are, absolutely horrendous. Everybody speaks in a very robotic tone that is often quite entertaining to this day. I certainly remember, even back in the year 2000, it being jarring just how robotic these characters speak when discussing very emotional themes. So there we are, Rio's got his pocket money. Housekeeper, Ine-san, who becomes a bit of a pain in his arse, has told him not to go out and do anything dangerous. And lo and behold, first thing he does is go out and ask people if they noticed anyone who was involved in his father's murder. So Rio here has already got distracted by a cat, set out to look for his father's killer, and he's met Megumi, who has just found a kitten that was injured by a black car speeding away from his father's house, and this ends up being his first lead. This little kitten that you meet, you get to name it through the game, you get to pet it, look after it, make sure it's doing well, and it's just one example of the little small kind of nuances that make this game quite interesting and just capture the small town life of Japan at the time. So some other things I want to mention in Shenmue's pursuit for ultra-realism at the time was the fact that if you look up into the sky at any time to see what the weather is, Yu Suzuki actually looked through all the weather records for the duration of time that Shenmue was set in and matched the weather in the game to what was happening according to the Japanese Met Office for Tokyo at the time. So on certain days where it's raining and snowing, this was actually happening in real life at the time. And that painstaking attention to detail was something else that was very different to most games and how they were produced at the time. And I think part of the reason why I gravitated towards it so much, the type of video games I've always been drawn to are ones that devote themselves to realism and immersion and make you feel like you're a part of a story as if you're actually there. This is why some of my favourite games of recent years are the likes of Red Dead Redemption 2 and quite a lot of Rockstar's titles. I really enjoy GTA 5 as well. And games such as Battlefield currently that devote themselves to historical accuracy in representing the themes and the action that they're displaying. These are the type of games I like, and this is why something like this had such a great effect on me at the time. I also want to talk a little bit about the game developer as well, because this is the type of thing that could never happen again, I don't think. Not in today's economy. So Yu Suzuki was a famous Japanese games developer who was responsible before this only for arcade games. So in the days of old where arcade games were how developers made lots of money, Yu Suzuki was a big name. So as I mentioned earlier, he released and produced Hang On in 1985. Which was a motorbike arcade game. Outrun in 1986, which was a sports car racing game set in America. And Virtua Fighter in 1993. All arcade games, and he had never worked on anything for a console before, and certainly nothing like this. This was supposed to be Yu Suzuki's magnum opus, and he started working on Shenmue, or the precursor to Shenmue, in 1996. At the time, all he said to the people giving him money was, "I want to make a longer experience, a more immersive experience, featuring some of the stuff that worked well in Virtua Fighter, but with a surrounding story." He initially started creating this for the Sega Saturn, And in 1997, development moved on to Sega's upcoming console, the Dreamcast, and Yu Suzuki had to drop everything he'd done for the Saturn up to that point and start from scratch. The amount of money that poured into this over many years was completely unheard of. So this is the first time Ryo is walking in to the nearest local town. And already you have this scene here of an elderly lady, hard of sight, who can't find the house that she's meant to be visiting. And the game gives you a sense of local community and caring for others right from the off. As the gameplay goes on, it really plays on Ryo as a character and what it means to be a good citizen, what it means to be helpful to others, and the price of charity, really, and helping people around you. So in Ryo's quest for information about his father, he's constantly getting distracted by helping other people, by doing little bits for them, seeing his friends, and his friends being quite worried about the path he's going down, the path of seeking vengeance. That is really a big theme of the first game. Another thing that this game did that other RPGs couldn't at the time was to offer voice acting for every scenario. There was no text like most RPGs had, and the ability to walk up to anyone you see and talk to them. Not everyone will immerse themselves in a full-on conversation, but most people you speak with have a few words to say and offer you a little bit, tidbits of information that help you on your way.
Any men wearing black suits? No, I sure didn't. I see.
As the game progresses, these small characters who you just come across day in, day out, they often have some importance in the storyline. So it does pay to talk to as many people as possible, so that when the game drops in that you need to speak to someone, it's almost as if you build a relationship with them. And if you walk into the small corner stores and stuff, you can look around, and the attention to detail again, just if you walk into any corner store in Japan, even to this day, you'll see the sliding doors, you'll see the stuff on sale around, you'll see the Japanese sweets and candies. And it really is just quite remarkable how much time and effort has gone into this.
What is it, baby boy do?
As you can see, the dialogue is somewhat off in English at times.
I don't have the time to fool with looking at men.
I see.
Case in point.
Thank you.
But that's part of the fun. I really quite enjoy the fact that the dialogue is so strange in this game, and there'll be countless examples of things that I've come across, strange scenarios, strange points of conversation, that I still find myself talking to people about who've played this game years later. I recently had a house party here with my flatmate Diki, and one of his friends, Don, was a big fan of this game, and we ended up just talking for an hour about all the strange idiosyncrasies and strange things we'd seen and come across. Okay, so I've just loaded into a different save file that I have for this game at the moment to show you what Dobuita looks like. Dobuita is the biggest town that Ryo has access to in the early part of the game. We're at night time now, so true to form, there's not many people roaming the streets. You'll see a lot of drunken lads walking around who often give you good chat if you walk up to them. Let's have a little chat with this guy.
I'm just fine and dandy.
Are you sure?
I'm okay.
Great, well there you go. I mean, if you've ever spoken to a drunk person, that's not unreasonable. Let's talk to Tom now in the hot dog stand. An inexplicably Jamaican man who sells hot dogs, just because that's normal. We all know a Jamaican lad who sells hot dogs down the town. And I'm just going to show you some of the stuff you can do around here, just to sort of pass the time in amongst things. And it looks like we're just about to enter a cutscene here, so let's see how this plays out. Can't quite remember what part of the game we're into here.
Yeah, I know you.
Nah, let me apologize for before.
What?
You know, you're a good fighter. I was impressed.
So, I'm looking for a guy named Charlie.
So it looks like we might get our first glimpse in this video of what combat looks like in this game. This is looking like it's going to go to sour pretty quickly. If I remember rightly, this lad is going to say, I'll show you Charlie, and take him to a dark car park. And Rio, like the idiot that he is, just goes along with that, not suspecting any maleficence at all. Yeah, sure, I'll just follow you into this dark car park, not a bother, my friend, no problem at all.
Gotcha! Come on, tough guy!
Until Mr. Muscle shows up here, along with Captain Jackhammer and Glove Lad and Mr. Beret. So this gives me the opportunity to show you a little bit how the combat works. It is based on the Virtua Fighter fighting style, which Yu Suzuki worked on. So it has some kinks in it, really. That was a two-dimensional fighting game, and really just a lot of the fight moves were ported over in 3 dimensions. So as you can see, sometimes you're flailing punches and kicks that aren't really going anywhere. And in the remastered version, they haven't really attempted to update that. I'm hoping that a lot of the work into Shenmue 3 goes into making the combat a little bit more fluid. Okay, I've forgotten a lot of the moves in Shenmue 1 now. But I haven't forgotten the tornado kick. Wrecking boys. There you go, little brief look at combat there. So this is a scene from towards the end of the game, which involves a 70-man battle. As you can see in the background, your man tapping his foot impatiently, just waiting for his beat down. I'm just going to mute the game music and sound effects while I talk over this bit and discuss some of the things I like about the game and some of the things that I don't like, and maybe some areas for improvement. So I've already spoken a lot about the things I like about this game. Really, it comes down to the immersion and the realism that I experienced when playing it the first time. I sat this game during my GCSE mocks and my grades literally suffered as a result of it. That's how addicted I was to this game. Well, actually, that's maybe not the best word given the current climate, but I did really like it, and as soon as I got home from school, this was straight on the Dreamcast and I'd be playing it away for hours at a time. I played it through the remastered version on PS4, and certainly a big factor of why I still like it is nostalgia. Definitely playing it through again, there's plenty of things that were not as good once the rose tinted glasses had been taken off, and I think we're starting to see a little bit of that during this clip here. One very frustrating thing about this game is the camera. So as I mentioned earlier, the combat style is based on the Virtua Fighter two-dimensional arcade game. Because this is now adding in a third dimension, porting a lot of those moves over make it feel quite clunky, and quite often you feel as if the moves that you're inputting on the controller aren't landing the way you expect them to, particularly with the circle button, which is for throw moves. You see here that the frequency with which I throw a guy, even though it's a useful move, is so slim because trying to pull off the button combos just often means you get your arse handed to you while you're trying to do it. So invariably it just turns a little bit button bashy, which for a game that's heavily based on combat is not great. Other things about the game that I mentioned earlier are the time it takes to get to certain places, to talk to certain people. You'll often find yourself in a situation where you find out who it is you're supposed to meet for information, but their shop doesn't open until the next day at 2 o'clock. So you have to kill a whole day without any ability to speed up time, which wouldn't be a problem if there was plenty of things to do, but although the game has a lot of people to talk to, most of them don't give you, any information that helps. You can go to the arcade and play a few old games or darts or something, but that becomes old very quickly. They did actually address that in the second game, but this is mainly the first one I'm talking about here. Another problem with the game as well is that although the story is quite interesting, the detective work that you do, just as soon as you think you're getting somewhere, the game will throw a long period of monotonous task at you, and you often end up thinking, well, what am I meant to be doing next? Because at the moment I've got a day job as a forklift driver, and I'm moving crates around this harbour here because I need money to get to Hong Kong. But why am I going there again? And it's very easy to lose track of the story, and I think that's why they put the notepad dynamic into it. But I think there shouldn't really be a notepad dynamic in games where there's detective stories going on. You're trying to figure out information. there shouldn't be so much monotonous distraction that you need a feature to remind you of what it is that you're meant to be doing next. So those were some of the things that I definitely noticed I liked less on playing it the second time. The things I loved about the game are much more, I think. This is always going to be a game that's very, very dear to my heart and very important to me. You have to remember as well, there really wasn't three-dimensional open world games like this. This came out the same year as Metal Gear Solid 1, a fantastic game, a really good game, and I wouldn't dare compare the two. But this is like a precursor to the GTA 3 style games, and this is one of the first projects that ever managed to do that, which is why it was so expensive at the time, I think. I really like the devotion to the realism. I really like that someone has thought about weather, someone has thought about culture, food, all that stuff. You just really feel like you're in a different world. So for a game that prides itself in realism, for a little Western kid growing up in Northern Ireland, it was almost fantasy to me. And it was, a big part of the reason that I got really interested in Japanese culture. One of the main reasons. So, as I said, I made my little pilgrimage out towards where a lot of this game is set when I was in Japan. And if I ever go back, I'll definitely make it into Dobuita, which I missed last time round. So, yeah, I think I've covered most of the things that I like and dislike about the game. Obviously, there's a third installment coming out soon, and I've got high hopes for how that will look. I'm worried that they might ruin it. So for things to improve upon, I really hope they fix the combat and make that more fluid and dynamic. And I really hope you don't have to drive a forklift around for a week. That's it. So I hope that's been interesting to watch. I hope it hasn't gone on for too long. Thank you very much for watching, and this video was sponsored by Jet Cola and Kurita Military Surplus.
Excuse me?
Merry Christmas! Ho, ho, ho! Everything's on sale at Kurita Military Surplus. Christmas is the time for giving. Ho, ho, ho! Buy your presents at Dobuita's Christmas sale.
Some other time.